Thank you, everyone, for investing some time with me here. I heard that this was a workshop. I will say, what I have for you is some good information, but not a workshop. Just FYI, but that's fine. I think we'll have a chance to make this interactive at the end. Very happy to take questions. We do have 30 minutes. I probably have 35 minutes worth of content, so I will move quickly. What I did want to do is focus on, I've heard a lot of great information here at this conference, really enjoying it. And I'm going to take many of the same themes you've heard, but take a little bit different angle on where I'm focusing on. I'm going to be focusing on taking the kind of lessons that we've heard around things like using Copilot or whatnot, which is great, but then what happens when you want to take it to the next level, where you want to take Agentic AI motions to production with operational information, where the game changes quite a bit. Okay, great. And so in that context, let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of backdrop. I don't have to tell this group some backdrop in terms of GenAI and why it matters, right? This is just a context-setting slide. But the thing I want to highlight is two things. Number one, of course, we all know that users and perhaps your customers, when it comes to operational information, are looking to get value and augment their work. And you can see the stat there by 2027, 30% or more of work product will be amplified by these kind of technologies. But of course, then you're here because your executives wanted to make investments in this key area. And we know because we talk to executives all the time, I'm sure your teams are, getting investments and such, and it's really, GenAI, of course, is attracting the attention of a lot of executive audiences. But there's an area where there's great opportunity in GenAI. The analysts we've been working with have said that there have been initial projects with GenAI that have not met expectations. But then there have been other areas of GenAI, particularly around operational information, where if you can get it right, it has radically exceeded expectations. And that's the opportunity that I want to talk about today. We all know the benefits that we're trying to seek. We're trying to, get information, perhaps even sometimes from a GenAI perspective, get nuanced information faster. We want to kind of extract or get insights from information, and ultimately, we want to deal with complexity in data in a better and transformative way. But there are challenges, and those challenges are many. But we've heard some great talks today about using great data pipelines and organizing information. And we've talked about the importance of governance. And also there's this pesky thing called costs. I don't know about your organizations. My organization and the organizations that we've even served, some very large banks, insurance companies, others, they're remarkably judicious with their money. Maybe that's why they're a bank and they're very successful. But controlling costs is also a key thing that's very much needed, particularly when you're talking about some of the challenges around governance, and also the fact that your information, most likely, is not all beautifully curated in one place, all ready to go with the governance policies that you need. Now, in that backdrop, what I want to do is just briefly talk about a use case. This is an example of what we've done with one of our customers. And this is, imagine your organization and perhaps your organization's sales and service activities. Now, you might not be a wholesale distributor. You might, I don't know. But you might be someone who's in the banking sector or insurance or other industries where these kind of things are applicable. And in this case, this particular manufacturer had thousands and thousands of parts that they dealt with. And as they went through the sales and service process, they had information that was beautifully available in databases where customers search for parts and such. But when customers were answering questions from a service perspective, or during the sales process, someone had a nuanced question about an individual item, they had to go into a lot of unstructured information, the product manuals from the thousands and thousands of products that they served. So imagine yourself as a retailer, or perhaps an insurance company or a bank. You have the same thing. You might call them something different. In an insurance case, you might call it the policy documents, where there's lots and lots of nuances that make up that policy. And from a banking perspective, it's the prospectus. It's the many other pieces of information that work together to make up that product. The challenge is particularly when customers were making nuanced, careful sales decisions, and also maybe they were working through a service case rather, they had to go into that unstructured information. And in our case, we were able to bring together, the challenge was that in working through this, getting those answers took time. And by working through a GenAI solution, of course, we've heard these examples in other scenarios of time savings. 80% of the time saved in finding information. But also it got better, because in this particular example, the organization, the people who worked with this, it was kind of high throughput. Someone would come into maybe the service function, they would get good at what they did, and they moved on to a different role in the organization, which is exactly what you want to do. You want to train people up and have them move on. Oh, but now you needed to bring someone up, and it took 6 months or more to get familiar with where's all the key information. Well, what if you could onboard employees faster and get work done? That's the kind of examples that was being referred to earlier about operational processes and getting massive improvements. But there's real challenges in scenarios like this. As you pull together the information, the documents, you have nuanced information that's put together here that involves maybe sensitive information. And there are other times where the information, again, as I said earlier, isn't all in one place. And for that, you need to have the right architecture to match the needs of operational information. And these are some of the factors that I wanted to share with you in the next remaining minutes that we have together of maybe some best practices we've seen and maybe ways of thinking about addressing this. You can see these. I won't read them in painstaking detail. But of course, the number one thing is really around not making governance or safety in GenAI an afterthought, but making it a first-class citizen. And I'll talk more about what that means. Your information in your organization, maybe it exists beautifully in one place. I haven't found an organization where that's true. And then it turns out that, of course, we've all heard lots of great talks around Agentic AI and using this. And it turns out many of the reasoning techniques that we've heard about can be used to support those other areas. And we'll talk about some best practices we've seen around that, and even some technologies that my company offers. And then lastly, the focus here is on that operational use case, where you can really get the 10, 20, 30x benefit. So your next project where you said, oh, I couldn't deal with this data, it's too sensitive, or my information isn't available readily. What if it could be? So let's break down these things into what these best practices and what these kind of architectures might look like. Now, when I mentioned earlier about governance first or safety first from a GenAI perspective, what do I mean? Well, it's many things. We've heard some of these things together early in other talks, but these are some of the capabilities that it means. Certainly it means like when you're interacting with your LLM and other related technologies for agentic capabilities, that you have a strong permissioning of who can see what, who can do what within the system. But it goes beyond that. It also goes into sub-document access control, which I'll talk about more in just a minute. And many other things, including how your user experiences interact, not just those that might be provided by a vendor like us, but in many customers that we serve, they have their own user experiences when they want to tap into all of these things that take advantage of safety, where that can be provided by an infrastructure, provided by a system itself. So let's break this down a little bit in terms of fine-grained access control. This can mean many things. Of course, at the base level, it can mean just who can see what from a user group perspective, and many times that's satisfactory to meet the needs. But what we've also found is sometimes there's data about the information you're looking at that is used to actually make up rules. Maybe you have a corpus of information that is just in the system, but if you go into the document, you find which documents are from the southeast versus the west versus other areas. It might alert you to, in that sales and service process, well, here are the reps that are servicing the southeast, so when they make an inquiry about information, they only get information about documents and information in that area because that's their job responsibility. That's an example of where metadata comes in. And there can be many other things from a governance perspective. Maybe only certain regions should even be able to have access to the information, so the locality of the information can play a large role. And those are the kinds of things that we do very well, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute, but those are some practices to think about. But I want to go beyond just this idea of access control and talk about what happens within a document as you interact with LLMs. In that context, what we found is there are many services inside the document that provide insights to a safety-first based approach. I'm going to talk about how this fits into Agentic AI in just a minute. But one area that we've seen is, as you interact with LLMs, we've seen that inside the documents, there's sensitive information, of course, as we all know. Now, sometimes you can scrub that information out and put it in some other place. But what if there's useful information in there where maybe the executive team is trying to do some research about salaries, or your executives are trying to find out the performance of certain information? You want them to be able to get access to that information. But of course, at the same time, maybe in another context, if the sales reps are given a tool to be able to kind of accelerate information in the system, you don't want them to be able to find out what's the commission of someone else versus them, as an example. And oftentimes, inside documents is where that information exists. And so being able to redact information, not just kind of separating out. Some techniques can, for instance, create different renditions of information, where this rendition of the document is over here, this one is over here, this one is over here. You might have 3 or 4 copies of information. But then the policy needs to change, and you need to go back and re-render all those documents. It gets very costly and expensive to do. What if you could do that more on the fly? As your business rules change, you make the change in one place, and when you retrieve the information to interact with the LLM, it automatically applies those policies. That's the kind of approach and the architecture that we recommend, and in fact, that's what we offer in the software that we work with. Additionally, what I wanted to highlight is one of the other challenges is around information not being all and beautifully curated in one place. And in that context, what we really find is an ability to not try to have the goal of, okay, step 1 is to take the information in one source, another source, bring it all together. So that is to say, embark on a 3-4 year journey to kind of bring all your data into one place, beautifully curated, and then you can get value. Our approach really takes into mind the reality that is probably your organization. Of course, you have a data lake. Of course, you have places where you can want to integrate information, and that's good. But we want to amplify that strategy by being able to take data that as it might be in place, apply those security policies, be able to access the information, and use it in agentic use cases. And what does that look like? Here's an example of some examples. One of the ones I just mentioned, being able to leave information in place and be able to then apply governance to that information as you use it in agentic flows. Also, one of the things that Rocket does is we are a 30-year-old innovative company. That is to say, we've been in market with software across many different platforms, including the mainframe, all the way down to cloud-native systems and dealing with SAP and data lakes and other kind of technologies. And we have one-click synchronization that can bring together data across these estates, secure them, and make them available in these kind of applications. And lastly, we have a number of areas where perhaps your applications themselves can be modernized, again, to fit into these contexts. I'm not going to go into this in super detail. It's available on the slides that you can see later. But we have lots of great technologies that fit into this frame. Now, what I wanted to come back to is probably the topic for the day here. Of course, we all care about Agentic AI and other related technologies, as I highlighted earlier, in that operational context. And here we can see a reference architecture, and I'll have a separate slide here just momentarily that balloons this out so we can talk a little bit more about it. But we're seeing some of the elements of the things I talked about earlier coming together. We see that safety first or governance first approach. Down on the bottom, we have our information policies that sit across each touch point from the time that an inquiry comes into an agentic flow to the curation of information where question classification is put into place. Where if a question, for instance, is not in the bounds of a business question, we simply reject it, as an example. And many other things that we do from a safety perspective. In the agentic reasoning area, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. And then, of course, all the way down to answer curation. As results come back, likewise, having a part of the flow where you monitor and then manage the system following those information policies, everything from access control to maybe redacting information before it goes to an LLM and beyond to fit into your solution. And we talked about the enterprise systems. And over here on the left-hand side is where we can see it coming together in terms of being able to bring together sources from many different places. We have multiple connectors and ways of feeding that information in, and we find that you need a mixture of strategies that maybe consolidate and bring things into single locations, but at the same time, dealing with the operational reality that you have existing systems, and you need to be able to reuse all those, not just the data, but it's just as important, all those information policies that you have. We heard in some of the opening remarks, some of the vendors talked about 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 information management policies. You can't afford to wait 3 or 4 years to kind of reproduce all that. You need that value now. And I'm going to break down a little bit more agentic before we wrap up. And of course, all of this is in that context of operational use cases. Now, one of the things I just wanted to highlight, which for the time, I'll just hit some big beats here, is the role that a modern agentic reasoning capability fits in. Now, of course, 6-8 months ago, many conversations were all about, in unstructured data spaces, were all about, if you had a RAG capability, that's your approach. Well, of course, as we all know, today it's all about agents. And each one of these layers below, where it talks about information management and the query curation, is an agent that's working together in a solid architecture to provide that benefit. But it also fits into the things above. What we found is we have table agents that go and look at information using multiple techniques, of course, including many generative capabilities, to seek structured data in unstructured sources to reduce costs. The more you can have cost management throughout this cycle, the better. Knowledge agents and many other things that make up a modern agentic approach. And for time, I'm going to have to skirt past many other good conversations we could have here. But suffice it to say is what we've really seen is the right approaches around that safety first, the approaches around bringing information throughout the organization, and the right agentic approaches throughout the architecture, protecting information but making it available in operational processes is a real difference maker. Now, what kind of differences can it make? What I wanted to highlight is one final use case I wanted to leave you with. And this would be around legal processes. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about a legal process, I think about a DocuSign. And that's really important, and a part of kind of automating a workflow around this signature process. But if you think about a contract and the life cycle of information, particularly if it's a contract that might live a long time, something like, I don't know, a mortgage loan that might last 30 years, or maybe in some cases more, and maybe many business contracts that last a long time, this signature portion is important, but it's the pre-negotiation, the pre-execution of the contract. Once a contract's been signed and moves through its life cycle, that contract goes through a lot. I don't know about your organization, but Rocket Software has acquired other great technologies and brought those benefits to our customers, and now we got to find the contract. Well, what are the terms with this customer as we're looking to modernize something and that sort of thing? And managing that life cycle is a real challenge. It involves a lot of manual effort. And all the things I talked about before, being able to provide strong safety in good answers, safety in, this kind of information shouldn't be available to a paralegal, but of course the head lawyer should be able to see all the terms in the document, if there's some nuanced terms as an example. Sometimes you want a sales rep to be able to see all the terms except some nuanced business terms as an example. And so all the things that I was talking about, and as you acquire companies, maybe not all the contracts are all in one place and you need to bring them together. And so what we have done, and in fact, Rocket had this same problem, and we applied this kind of solution into this technology. And so that's what I wanted to kind of wrap up with, was a use case around this. And speaking of wrap up, just a couple of things that I want to do, and I want to respect the next speaker here in just a minute. But of course, there's a lot about principles. Rocket knows that these kind of technologies are very new to all of us. All of us have been working with exciting technologies and maturing our career and our skills, but at the same time, there's a lot of considerations that each organization is in. Some people are at the beginning of the journey, some are deep into it, and you're like, hey, I want to talk to you about the agent of that. I want to go deep with you, Doug. And that's fine. That'd be great to do. I'd be happy to do that you can catch me tonight or stop by the Rocket booth. I'll be happy to chat with you. But we recognize that a human-oriented AI is really important. It's, of course, about business results, but it has to be done in an ethical way. It has to be done in a way that's human-centered and all the way down to all the things the kind of things that your organization is probably considering. So next steps, my name is Doug Johnson. It's not Gordon Dent, but he's a gentleman here in your area that you can reach out to for follow-up. He can definitely connect you with me as appropriate. I do probably have time for about 1 or 2 questions, 4 minutes before the next speaker, but I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Questions? Yeah.
So as you mentioned in your use case about the legal assessments, so how could we make sure that the result or whatever is AI is doing is correct as per the compliance? And is there any, for example, if something goes wrong, will it send any notification or anything to the organization legal department?
Yeah, so the question, I think everyone probably heard it, but how do we make sure that correctness, and if something isn't seen, how do you kind of alert the rest of the organization so it can be fixed? As we all know, of course, in these non-deterministic systems, we have to put a lot of controls around to try to make them more deterministic. There's no shorthands for this. It does involve testing as part of that. And also it involves self-reporting. So our solutions do have a mechanism of when there's a question, whether it be in our UI or as part of our APIs, hey, if you say, hey, this doesn't look correct, you can report that, and then it has a mechanism to close the loop with the systems. And we have many guardrails along the way to protect information, as I was kind of saying there, for correctness and other things. So I realize that there can be a more nuanced answer, but for time's sake, I'm going to have to shorten. I hope that was helpful. And I'm happy to talk more about that. I do want to be sensitive to the next speaker, so I appreciate your time very much, and thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this information useful.